Optimism in Cervantes by Egberto Bermúdez. In his speech about lineages, Don Quixote explains the relationship between virtue and heaven to his niece. I quote, "I know that the path of virtue is very narrow and ends in life, not life that has an ending, but in the one that has no end," end quote. To Don Lorenzo de Miranda, son of Don Diego, the Don lists all the virtues essential to be a good knight-errant. He must be a theologian so that he may give reasons for the Christian rule he professes. He must be adorned with all the virtues, theological and cardinal. He must be chaste in thought, a man of his word, generous in action, valiant in deed, patient in adversity, charitable to the needy, and finally, a maintainer of the truth, although his defense may cost him his life. End quote. Therefore, Don Quixote's optimism and that of Cervantes, I quote, "The pen is the tongue of the soul," end quote, is not superficial, a mere question of temperament, but one that is ontological and profound, which comes from faith that anchors itself in hope, in the certainty of the fidelity of God, of a God that fulfills his promises, and optimism whose precious fruit is the courage to love God and neighbor. We should not forget that since his birth as a character of the novel, Don Quixote is a Christian knight, or a knight-errant under divine inspiration, whose main motivations are the love of his lady, the desire to increase his fame, the service to his country, the righting of wrongs, and to sally forth through the four parts of the world in quest of adventures on behalf of the distressed. End quote. All of these awaken in the reader the love of truth, freedom, beauty, goodness, and justice. Concerning hope, St. John Paul II, in his book Memory and Identity, thinks that faith in the resurrection of Christ, the final victory of good over evil, is at the root of our Christian hope. I quote, "The Paschal mystery confirms that good is ultimately victorious, that life conquers death, and that love triumphs over hate," end quote. These words are most appropriate in understanding the conclusion of Cervantes' masterpiece. At the end of the novel, we find a Don Quixote who has been defeated, but conqueror of himself. He recognizes himself as Alonso Quijano the Good and acquires the knowledge of death as an essential truth of life. He has been unable to find complete fulfillment in this life due to the imperfections of the world and his own weaknesses. Unable to achieve total happiness in this temporal universe, he is at the same time able to find fulfillment through the awareness that death is the door to a transcendent horizon. The same person who was Don Quixote of La Mancha is the one who now knows himself to be Alonso Quijano. He is grateful to God for this extraordinary transformation and cries out, I quote, "Blessed be the Almighty for this great benefit he has granted me. Infinite are his mercies and undiminished even by the sins of men." End quote. At this point, it becomes clear that the whole novel has been a humble but profound and optimistic tale of learning and redemption, the act of charity and mercy of the good Samaritan Cervantes, who rescues the old fool and madman in patches, revealing that, and I quote, "Behind the foolishness of the fool, there is still the dignity of a basically good and decent human being, a human being who does not quite know what he's doing," end quote. This comes from Cesario Bandera in his book, The Humble Story of Don Quixote, Reflections on the Birth of the Modern Novel. Even the playful and benevolent irony of Cervantes, his genial sense of humor, contributes in a subtle way to this act of salvation, transforming it into the most eloquent expression of compassion, solidarity, and empathy. It is time to ask ourselves, what changes and what is permanent in the life of the Don? The answer to this question may be found in the following quote. I quote, "After the priest had heard the sick man's confession, he came out saying, 'There is no doubt that Alonso Quijano is at the point of death, and there is also no doubt that he is in his entire right mind. So we should go in and enable him to make his will.' These sad tidings burst open the floodgates of the housekeepers, the nieces, and the good squire's swollen eyes. Their tears flowed fast and furious, and 1,000 sighs rose from their breasts. For indeed, it has been noted, the sick gentleman, whether as Alonso Quijano the Good or as Don Quixote of La Mancha, had always been so good-natured and so agreeable that he was beloved not only by his family, but by all who knew him. At length, Don Quixote's last day came after he had received all the sacraments and expressed his abhorrence of books of knight-errantry. The notary, who was present, said that he had never read of any knight who ever died in his bed so peacefully and as Christian as Don Quixote. And so, amid the tears and lamentations of his friends who knelt by his bedside, he gave up the ghost. That is to say, he died, end quote. What is permanent is that Don Quixote had always been trying to accomplish good in his life. And since he is a Christian and has hope, he prepares himself to die in peace because he knows that what awaits him is permanent, that is eternal life. This is the way in which Alonso Quijano dies, peacefully, in his bed, after repenting for all his sins and having received all the sacraments. Don Miguel de Cervantes will die in the same way on April April 23rd, 1616, confirming that, and I quote, "the pen is the tongue of the soul," end quote, and I quote, "he preaches well who lives well," end quote. He leaves us as a legacy of love Don Quixote, the best known and influential Spanish novel of all times, to teach while amusing us with a masterpiece of honest entertainment whose language delights and its invention amazes and astounds in an extraordinary mingling of delight and moral philosophy, truth with jokes, the sweet with the useful, and the human with the divine. It is a metaphor of man's search for absolute beauty, goodness, and truth. Thank you for listening.